Gentlemen, may I request you to please take your seats as we'll be starting the session now. Please take your seats. Okay, so we heard about the role of AI in the first session this morning. We'll continue our discussion on the role of AI in addressing the issue for which we all are here. And we have Rich Lesser from Boston Consulting Group. I request Rich to actually take the floor and start the session. Rich.
To be here with you. So I'm Rich Lesser, I'm Global Chair of BCG. We realized a while ago, actually, that the opportunity in AI and climate to bring AI to help on climate was an enormous opportunity, and that we had a shared passion in this space with Google, who has been a leader on both fronts also. And so we collaborated and we focused on putting together a report, accelerating climate action with AI, and using it as an opportunity to provide real-life case examples. Where is it actually getting used today, and what impact is it having? What are the potential risks and things we need to manage in that regard? And what are the kinds of policies and opportunities for collaboration that can accelerate to bringing AI at scale to making a difference in climate? And this session is an opportunity to go deep on all of those issues. What we're going to do is, in a couple moments, Kate Brandt, the Chief Sustainability Officer at Google, and I are going to give you a quick overview of the report. We're just going to hit the high level. I would actually really encourage you to read it. I learned a lot. Our teams have been working on it so closely for a while. There's a lot in there, but we're going to just hit the really high points so that we can spend most of the time in a conversation. And then I'm going to welcome Damilola Ogunbiyi. I'm sorry if I pronounced your name wrong. But she's the CEO of Sustainable Energy for All, and she's really going to talk about how AI can accelerate the energy transition and enable energy access for everyone. And then we're going to do a panel to go deeper onto some of these issues that will include Kate and Johan Rockström, the director for the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, and Rick Duke, who's the Deputy Special Envoy for Climate. So we have a great set of people to go deep, and I'm confident we can have a really good conversation. So what I wanted to do was to get us going, well, Kate and I, but I'll do the first couple slides and then she'll come up to just give a quick overview of the report and set the stage for the conversation that we're going to have. Let's see if the clicker works. Wait. Okay, can you all see that? Okay, I suspect if you've been at COP for more than 2 hours, you already know this, and you probably knew it before you arrived. But we are not on the track we need to. This was the year of the global stocktake, and the bottom line is a simple one, which is we need to be on a path to 1.5 degrees, and our current trajectory, depending on whether you go by what's been implemented or what's been committed, whether you're optimistic or pessimistic, puts us somewhere between, say, 2.1 and 3.2 degrees. Most reports I see would estimate we're probably on a 2.4 to 2.8 degree path. So we're not just a little off track from where we need to be, we're substantially off track. And what we need to do is to bring every lever we can to bear on how to do that, how to address that, and how to do it quickly. By the way, just to be clear what that actually means, if we're going to be on the track we need to be on, we should be reducing GHG emissions about 7% every year. And our current trajectory is that we're increasing 1.5%. So we're not just talking a small shift in trajectory, but we need a major one. And we all know how hard it is to deploy massive amounts of capital at scale. And I think one of the elements that led us to this report was the belief that AI was a lever to get more out of the assets and capabilities that we have today, not just depend on putting in the huge amount of assets that will ultimately need to be put in, but will allow us to make more progress faster, in addition to addressing all of the other challenges around adaptation, supporting research, and other things. So that's the starting point. So then we did a survey. BCG likes doing surveys, as you can imagine. And we asked people, like, what are the kind of ways you could see AI helping in climate? And first of all, the most important conclusion is the vast majority, 87%, see, then these are executives in decision-making roles. So it's not the general public, it's business leaders who can drive elements of what their businesses do. 87% believe that that AI can make a meaningful difference in climate. And then if you go a little bit deeper and say how, well, where they start is on reducing emissions, on measuring emissions. A huge issue right now, particularly when you get outside the four walls of a company, is being able to measure the emissions throughout its entire value chain, and on removing emissions. Because yes, job one is reduce as much as we possibly can, but we will not get to net zero unless there's not some element of removals as well. But what you also see, and that I found interesting, is that there's an opportunity around predicting hazards, about managing vulnerabilities, so that there are other elements that can make a meaningful difference for adaptation and resilience, and supporting countries and companies and communities that are wrestling with the changes of the climate that are already baked in. And that was a very important element of it. So then, let me just give a quick sense of the framework that the report is built around, and that I think our conversation will be too. So the first opportunity is around changing the emissions trajectory through reduction and removal, and that there's really two separate components that we highlight. And one of the things that I love about the report is it's not about the theory of this. I mean, we can all postulate the theory. It's about real life examples. Google's been involved in a bunch. We've been involved in a number too, but we also bring in examples that neither of us were involved in that are just very meaningful to make a difference in the world. And we focus in two buckets. One is on measurement and monitoring. So how do we just even know what's out there? Because, as to use the old quote, you can't manage what you don't measure. And then second, where can you actually use it to reduce, to optimize grids, to support renewable agriculture efforts, to do other things that can really meaningfully shift the trajectory on emissions, often with assets that are in place today. And then second, to focus on adaptation and resilience. It's a desperate need in a warming planet, particularly with so many parts of the world that don't have the resources to really invest in everything. No one can invest in everything to build adaptation, so to address adaptation. So where can you focus resources in the best ways? And there we focus in two critical elements. How do we predict hazards with greater reliability so that we can see what are the biggest dangers coming? And then how do we manage the vulnerabilities? What are the vulnerabilities that we want to tackle? And then finally, I do want to highlight that you can think about AI in many other ways as well, a number of which have relevance for climate, whether it's climate modeling to predict drought or wildfire spread, whether it's climate economics. I think one of the things that frustrates me the most right now is you read report after report about how much it will cost to address climate. You see very inadequate studies of the cost of inaction. And one of the roles that, and the inaction in many cases swamps the cost that we're talking about to act. But if you don't know what those costs of inaction are, you can't get the public or government officials or company leaders often to make the investments. And so using AI to help understand what are the costs of inaction can make a difference. We can use it for things like education and behavior change with the general public, whether it's helping people know what actions to take on a daily basis, or whether it's just educating people more generally. And finally, of course, and we read about this, AI is going to be critical to fundamental research and breakthroughs. Fusion energy may be the most exciting, but the most far out, but you can find so many examples of climate technology or other opportunities to make a difference where AI can play a central role. So the report goes through all three of those buckets and provides examples on each of them. And then before I turn it over to Kate, the final thing I want to highlight is we're not talking about small numbers here. What we're talking about, our best estimate, using real life examples. So this isn't the theory of what AI might be able to do someday. If we just think about scaling the examples that are already in the world today, we think it has the potential to contribute meaningfully to 5 to 10% greenhouse gas emissions reductions. So if you think about what we need to do over the next decade, which is take out half, give or take, of the emissions, we're talking about AI can contribute 10 to 20% of that journey. But the thing to remember is AI is a low capital investment technology. So yes, we'll need to do many other things as well, but this is like if you were ranking the kinds of investments you would make first, always you go after the places where you get the lowest investments with the biggest bang for the buck, and AI has enormous potential to be a part of that journey. So that's what I wanted to get us started. I think, Kate, now you're going to dig in a bit more on the policies and some of the things that we can do.
Great. Can you all hear me? Yep. Okay, great. And Rich, I'll grab the clicker from you as well.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
Well, thank you so much, Rich, and it has been truly such an honor and a pleasure partnering with you and your team on this report, and thank you all so much for being here to have this conversation with us. And I really wanted to underscore the point you were just making. You know, what we keep talking about at this COP is we have the technology, we have the solutions, we just need to accelerate our progress to get to that 43% reduction we need to see by 2030. And so that's why I think this finding is really exciting. It's all about how can AI be a companion to existing technologies and solutions to drive progress more quickly. And when we get into the panel conversation, we'll give you some really real world examples about where that's happening today. And I think that's also the other really exciting part of this is not theoretical. And so as Rich said, I really encourage you to read the report because it is exciting to see how much is already happening. You know, we've said at Google, we've been an AI first company for 7 years. So although we've only more recently started hearing a lot more in the kind of in public discourse about AI through generative AI, we've been at some of these solutions for quite some time, and now they're really beginning to bear some fruit. So a couple of the other insights that we shared in the report are there's 3 really key areas that we're seeing big opportunities. And again, this is based on our lived experience at Google of the kinds of solutions that are working that we've been building over the last many years. So of course, information. You know, we've been talking a lot this week. I'm sure you've been in conversations about the data. We have so much information, but how do we organize that information and make it universally accessible and useful? That might sound familiar. That's actually the mission of Google. AI can supercharge that in really powerful ways. Around prediction, you know, Rich, you were mentioning, of course, we're also dealing with extreme weather events today. This is not over the horizon anymore. And so we're seeing really powerful opportunities to better understand weather patterns, to better understand how wildfires spread, to better understand global hydrologic models. So again, really powerful opportunities to deal with the impacts we're seeing today, to prepare and become more resilient for the future. And then the last area is around optimization. This is, of course, the superpower of machine learning. Such a tremendous opportunity to reduce energy use, to reduce the need for materials, to do things in a more efficient way, whether that's routing, shipping, how we fly in the sky, how we produce materials. So again, we'll get into some concrete examples, but this is the big opportunity. And of course, this is a big double bottom line opportunity, not only to get more value out of our environmental resources, but also to save money. And the second part of the report really touches upon the environmental footprint of AI. You know, at Google, the way that we talk about our strategy is that we need to be bold and responsible. And so I think it's really important that we're very upfront about what do we know about the environmental footprint of AI, and also what are some unanswered questions that we really need to do more work around. So what you're seeing up here are 2 of the key stats. This is strong, you know, third-party verified research that's been published in journals. The first is around the greenhouse gas emissions of global data centers. So in 2022, global data centers represented about 0.1 to 0.2% of emissions. So that's still a relatively small number. And in that, we estimate that roughly 25% of that was going towards machine learning. Then on water use, this is another key area to take a look at because many data centers globally use water for cooling because it's actually more energy efficient. The Department of Energy has a study that shows that in the US, data centers used about 0.2% of water. So again, I think it's important to level set on what is the science that we have today, what do we understand about the footprint today, but also that we know that we're at an inflection point in AI, and that actually there isn't good data that predicts what is that curve going to look like, what is the energy consumption, water consumption going to look like in the future. So we identify that as a key area for more research, and that's certainly something we're going to be doing more work on in the coming years. And then the last thing I wanted to hit on is policy recommendations. That's the third part of this report. As a former policymaker myself, and we're going to be joined by Rick Duke in just a moment, who's a wonderful former colleague, it's so critical that not only do we have technology companies in the private sector coming to the table, but also we need policymakers. And so we talk about these three key areas where policymakers can really make a difference. First is around enablement, creating the enabling conditions for us to get maximal benefit, to get to that 5 to 10% potential for emissions reductions. So that's everything from having in place positive data sharing policies, doing job skilling. This is a really critical topic to make sure that people can utilize AI in their everyday lives alongside the work that they're doing. The second area we identify is around deployment. How do we put in place the policy conditions to enable deployment in a responsible way? And then the third area is, again, what we were talking about just a moment ago with the environmental footprint. How can policymakers put in place the right incentives, the right guardrails around the environmental footprint of AI? So I'm going to leave it there, and I'm going to turn it back to Rich to introduce our next speaker.
Oh, we'll hold that because
Okay.
I've got this. Okay, so we're going to do two things now. We are going to hear from one of our speakers, and then we're going to do our panel. It's my great pleasure to welcome Damilola Ogunbiyi. Again, Ogunbiyi, I think I'm getting closer now, the CEO of Sustainable Energy for All. She's the CEO and Special Representative of the UN Secretary General for Sustainability for All and co-chair of UN Energy. She focuses on closing energy access gaps, showcasing that a clean energy transition is possible, and working to provide the opportunity of a prosperous, dignified, and healthy life for all. And she leads SC for All's work to bring clarity and focus on a critical path towards SDG 7 implementation in the context of the Paris Agreement on climate change, and works with private and public sectors to catalyze country-level actions and support cross-cutting high-impact opportunities. So welcome, and we're so looking forward to hearing from you. That's perfectly fine. Is that mic on over there? Or you could just stand here, whichever you prefer.
Hi. Sorry, I thought I would be at a podium. Hello, thank you everybody for having me. Thank you, Google. Google have been our real great partners to the UN system and UN Energy. For all of you that don't know, we have an energy compact process called 24 Free Carbon, which is institutions like Google have signed up to. Why this is relevant is because how AI is powered is just as important as the AI system itself. I work on making sure no one is left behind and alleviating people out of energy poverty, so it's the less sexy side of climate. And why that is important is because you cannot live a dignified life without a basic minimum amount of energy. And while tools like this and what Google has created are so vital, is it allows us to predict how much energy people are going to need, where they're going to need it, the types of energy, the affordability level, and the willingness to pay. And they're two different things, what you can afford and what you're willing to pay. So all these indices allow us to say, where are the most vulnerable people? How do we build the health systems around them, the education system around them? But energy really is the basis for a lot of these things. So as we sit here today and we talk about transitions, it's also important for us to think about people who have nothing, people who unfortunately won't be able to view us here today through an internet because they don't have any electricity or energy access at all. And it will be also important to think that this problem is not just a climate issue, it is actually a development issue. And in the most vulnerable countries, climate is development and development is climate. And I'm really, really proud to see how many governments from the global south are actually leading charge in climate ambition. And unfortunately, governments from the developing world are not recognizing that they have to use less for other people to have anything at all. So having said that, we think AI is really, really a game changer as it deals with energy poverty. And again, no more doom and gloom, but I just want to bring one statistic to you that 2.3 billion people in this world do not have access to clean cooking. It is the 5th largest cause of death for an African woman today. So anything that we can do to support this cause is not just about nice presentations or reports, which are really important, but as the host said, implementing this is actually saving lives. So thank you so much for having me. Sorry I have to run, and great work to Google and their partners for bringing this to the forefront. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for being with us. So we're now going to begin our panel, and I want to welcome to the stage, well, Kate, of course. In addition to her role now as Chief Sustainability Officer at Google, she was previously the United States' first federal Chief Sustainability Officer, where I love this stat, she was responsible for promoting sustainability across the U.S. government, which is 360,000 buildings, 650,000 vehicles, and almost half a trillion dollars annually in purchased goods and services. So that's certainly a big portfolio. So you've lived it on the government side, and now, of course, you're helping to drive it for the world in your role at Google. I want to welcome Rick Duke also to join us. He's, as I said, Deputy Special Envoy for Climate for the U.S. He focuses on encouraging major economies to develop and implement ambitious emissions reduction targets under the Paris Agreement. He also works to accelerate progress towards clean energy and to advance fast cooling strategies. We will most certainly need fast cooling strategies in the decades ahead. Right now, I guess it's slower warming strategies, and then we need, so we'll talk about that. And finally, he served as Special Assistant to President Obama, helping to craft and implement Climate Action Plan, including defining the 2025 emissions reduction target from the Paris Agreement. And finally, I really welcome Johan Rockström, the director for the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research. He's, I think, known to all of us, unbelievably well-known scientist for his work on climate sustainability issues, and specifically the planetary boundaries framework, which I think has become so embedded in our understanding of what we need to do, that he first published in 2009 and then updated in 2015. Those 9 planetary boundaries are argued to be fundamental in representing a safe operating space for humanity as they lay out environmental guidelines and the limits that we all need to operate within. He also, just this year, led the study by the Earth Commission on the 8 safe and just Earth system boundaries so that we can have everything in what we do, make it possible for everything to thrive. So thank you all for being here. I'm going to get us going. We know AI has the potential to help mitigate, and the estimates from our work together was 5 to 10%, so a very meaningful number, which is actually the total emissions of the EU is at the higher end of that range. Johan, what role do you think AI can play in terms of climate science acceleration?
Yeah, thanks, Rick, and great to be here at this very important topic and actually disruptive topic, because we see when we assess the landscape that this is really a starting point of nothing less than one part of a 4th industrial revolution. I will leave aside for the moment the mitigation assessments, because what we are focusing all our efforts on today in science is really on your climate fundamentals part and the whole topic on predicting hazards. We're increasingly using machine learning, big data, and AI methods to improve the prediction of extreme events. We're actually able today to get a handle of the Indian monsoon through AI applications, improving our prediction with 2 weeks before any weather system is able to do the same. This is an enormous help for small-scale farmers and their decisions of how to buy seed and fertilizers and when to kick off their rainy seasons. But we're right as we speak now working increasingly on looking at detection of tipping points. This is, I would argue, one of the big holy grails to be able to really guide our journey into the overshoot period that we're very likely entering. So all science shows, the IPCC supports it, that we unfortunately will very unlikely have a journey directly to 1.5 from our current 1.2, but we'll have to unfortunately cope with 30, 40 years of overshoot. Now, crashing through 1.5 somewhere 2030, 2035, 30, 40 years of overshoot at best, and then land back at 1.5 by the end of the century. By the way, that's another topic, but the only reason why we land back is if we come back within planetary boundaries. Other topic. The big AI question is what happens during the overshoot? Can the Earth system cope with 0.2, 0.3 degrees Celsius of overshoot beyond 1.5 when the science now shows that go past 1.5 and we likely trigger multiple tipping points? We simply do not know. AI can help us. This is an area where satellite remote sensing data, what Google Earth Engine represents, together with neural networks and machine learning, can help us in getting better precision on the likelihood of crossing tipping points during different periods of stress caused by our climate change. So I think this is, it's really urgent to get this science in place. So it is both about predicting extreme events happening, droughts, floods, monsoons, but also the longer-term challenges of tipping point detection.
Yes, I think that is probably, because you said 0.2 to 0.3 degrees C, but the trajectory on could be even more than that. And,
oh, yes,
and I think that the understanding the tipping point issue is going to be a massive one to try to get people to step up in the level of action and engagement. That's a very interesting.
No, of course, don't get me wrong here. I mean, we're following a pathway that takes us to 2.93 degrees Celsius that we're following today. That is a path to disaster. To be honest, we may not even need AI to assess the outcomes of that future. But if we deliver as we are trying to set out to do, and that we have a chance of coming back after a period of overshoot, that's also when we need to understand what are the likelihoods of being able to be successful.
So you're saying even in the optimistic case, we need AI, or
absolutely.
It can be a tool to help understand what the impacts could be, let alone in the more challenged cases.
Correct.
Great. Rick, love to hear from you about how you see AI as a potential accelerant in taking on climate action and where you see the biggest opportunities in that. And actually, do you have particular sectors or parts of the global economy where you think it could be particularly relevant?
Yeah, thank you. And I'm going to build on some of the discussion so far. You take this in a lot of different directions. I think we will take AI for climate in many different directions. And I'll start by noting that we are, as U.S. government, seeking to put AI for climate literally into the text of the outcomes here at this COP, including potentially through the global stocktake, because we do think it has such comprehensive implications for climate action and tremendous opportunities if we manage it right and if we invest together to tackle the kinds of things that Johan was referencing and the mitigation potential that it can bring, as the report has indicated from BCG. But let me just give a specific example. You noted fast cooling, you could call it fast mitigation, if you will. And I think it builds on some of the points that Dr. Rockstrom was just making, and also news from just yesterday here at COP. We were privileged to be co-hosting, as U.S. government, a summit on non-CO2 greenhouse gases, methane and non-CO2 greenhouse gases with China just yesterday, where there was, perhaps most importantly, for the first time, China stepped up and said it would address non-CO2 greenhouse gases, including methane, in its next Paris Agreement target. I mention that because those non-CO2 greenhouse gases would be the third largest source of emissions in the world if they were a country. And now they're going to be in the Paris Agreement architecture. And the US and China with UAE called on countries around the world to join in a fast mitigation effort on methane and non-CO2. Also $1 billion in new grant money put forward and a set of regulatory steps by governments. So I want to mention that in part because it can feel very overwhelming that we're still headed towards, call it 2.5 to 3 degree range. Reference case today, you can debate the numbers. But at least we're not headed towards 3.5 to 4, which is where we arguably were headed before the Paris Agreement was put in place. And I say that to note that through the Kigali Amendment on HFCs, which eliminates up to 0.5 degree of centigrade, through the work of the Paris Agreement itself with the NDCs, now more comprehensive in China, including fast mitigation through addressing methane, the the world is incrementally improving the picture, and we just need to pick up the pace. AI is something that, in many ways, can help us to better understand the risks from failure to do that, but also set us up for success in actually mitigating at the pace and scale and comprehensiveness that's required. I will just note that in the question of methane very specifically, and for that matter, things like tropospheric ozone, which accounts for 0.25 C of today's warming effect, but very few people think about as a climate forcer. There's massive opportunity for AI to help governments to understand what's happening in the atmosphere, what is driving ground level ozone formation in their economy right now, in a way that then they can act on with precision and speed in order to mitigate things like VOC emissions that would cut not just that public health pollutant of ground level ozone, but also deal with that 0.25 C of today's climate change that it is causing. So that's an example of a very technical area where better computing power, better machine learning, and AI specifically could be very useful in giving governments like China the opportunity to act on a key climate prize that's also going to improve public health, and by the way, reduce the 6% global crop losses that ground level ozone is currently causing. So win-win-win, and you can say the same thing about measuring methane with more precision so that we can mitigate methane more effectively. So it's a fast cooling or fast mitigation opportunity, but just one of many sweeping opportunities that advanced computing and AI specifically can help us with.
So, Kate, just before I come to you, because we're on methane, I happen to be with an energy CEO from a particular country where methane is actually a real challenge for them right now. When we were talking about what they could do in the short term, AI and methane was like the top of the list for them to get fast on it. I mean, there'll be obviously a lot of capital investment to deal with it in the longer term, but how you build methane AI tools in this for something that over 25 years is 80 times worse than carbon dioxide, even though it's measured at 28 over 100 years, it's incredibly important. Also for your planetary overshoot, I think it's a perfect example of where it can make a difference. Kate, you talked about, when you were presenting the slides a couple minutes ago, opportunities in information, optimization, and prediction. And you guys have been living it in practice in many examples, and I thought maybe you could bring that to life a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, we're also very bullish on the opportunity for AI to do better methane detection. So that's something that we're actively working on with partners. And so we're very much looking forward to continuing that conversation with you, Rick. Yes, so I would love to share some examples because, as I said, I think what's really useful about this report is it's showing us what's already working today and insights in what we need to be doing more of. So information. Here we know that we can put more helpful information in the hands of businesses, of policymakers, and individuals when they're making key decisions, and that AI is a very powerful tool for doing that. So one really nice example of that from our work at Google is something called fuel-efficient routing. So you may have noticed if you use Google Maps, maybe you even used it today, there's a little green leaf that shows up in your navigation now. That's showing you the most fuel-efficient route if it doesn't already have the same ETA. And what we're doing in the background is using AI to optimize across a bunch of different variables, the gradient of roads, what's traffic like today, and several others, and then providing a very simple decision-making moment for the driver or the user of, would you like to take the most fuel-efficient route? And this is working. This is having very real-world impact. So we brought this tool into Maps in October of 2021. And since then, we've seen 2.4 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent emissions avoided through people using eco-friendly routing. That's like taking about 500,000 fuel-based cars off the road. So we're seeing really real-world impact by putting helpful information in people's hands at that moment of decision. Then when we talk about optimization, I mentioned this is the superpower of machine learning. There's a lot of really great examples of optimization, but I think my favorite one right now is related to aviation. So we talk a lot at COPs about hard to abate sectors. We know global aviation is roughly 2% of global emissions, and that a lot of the technology solutions that we're seeing, aviation biofuels, alternative forms of engines, batteries, these are going to take a long time to deploy. They're probably not going to get fully deployed by 2030. But there's a really exciting new opportunity that we've found, which is that the IPCC tells us that a third of the global warming impact of aviation is actually coming from contrails, those white plumes that you see sometimes, and that's really important. They're only formed sometimes, behind jets. Well, what we were able to do in a partnership with Breakthrough Energy and American Airlines was first to use AI to analyze satellite imagery of contrails to better understand the conditions under which contrails are forming, because we actually didn't have great insights into that. And then to use that to provide really easy and implementable insights to pilots about how to change their elevation when they're flying to avoid the formation of a contrail. And we had a very exciting outcome in our first pilots with American, which is that they were able to reduce contrails by more than half, by 54%. So suddenly we're seeing a hard to abate sector with solutions that are going to take a long time, and then we could perhaps get rid of a whole third of those impacts through the power of AI. And now we're expanding that work in partnership with Eurocontrol, who manages the busiest European airspace, and we're looking forward to bringing more partners in on this as well. And then the third area I'll just touch upon is prediction. You know, of course, Johan, you were talking about all the really powerful ways you're looking at longer-term prediction. We're also seeing really important use cases for dealing with the extreme weather that people are experiencing today. As you probably know, the Secretary General has placed a really large emphasis on early warnings for all. And so we've built a partnership with the WMO, particularly around flooding. And so what we're bringing to that partnership is a tool that my wonderful colleague, Dr. Yossi Matias, who's here with us at COP, he and his team started building this tool in 2018. And what they did is they used AI to build a world-class global hydrologic model that enables us to predict riverine flooding now 7 days in advance. That's something that was never possible before. And so now through this platform called Flood Hub, we are able to provide these 7-day in advance early warnings to communities. And we're doing this for over 80 countries around the world on every continent, reaching populations of up to 470 million people. So this has the potential to save lives. And we saw this just a couple of months ago in August in Chile. There was terrible flooding, and Flood Hub was delivering actionable warnings to that community to get out of harm's way. So those are just a few of the examples which I would point to that we're really excited about.
I loved all of them. I just have to say, as someone who flies a lot, it was shocking to me when I realized like 3 or 4 years ago how much contrails. I just always thought it was the carbon dioxide out the back of the plane. And I get why that's hard, and hydrogen in planes is many decades away in these solutions, but solving contrails feels very solvable. So bringing AI to it, it doesn't solve the whole problem, but if you can take a meaningful chunk, that one it's personally because it's one of my biggest contributions to global warming. So I love that. So, okay, you can't talk about AI without talking about opportunities, which we've been discussing, but also risks. Some of those risks are just in the energy consumption, the water usage of AI data centers themselves. And I think it's really important we take a couple minutes. Johan, I wanted to start with you just to get your sense of how do you think about the risks of AI as you think about environmental impacts, planetary boundaries, the kinds of topics that you look at. And then Kate, you guys are living it on the ground, so I wanted to get your perspective on it too.
Yeah, thanks. So just before coming to risks, I just want to close kind of this first segment by also saying that one of the big steps we're taking now, you introduced me by reminding that the first Planetary Boundary Science paper was published in 2009, the second one in 2015. We actually did a third update in 2023, following roughly an IPCC pace, 6-7 years between each assessment of the state of the planet, which of course is unacceptable in a situation where we need to exponentially start transforming ourselves back into a safe space. In the New York Climate Week and following up here at COP28, we're now stepping up the game and going to every year produce what we call a planetary boundary health check. So basically measuring the planet is a necessity today, all the biophysical processes that regulates the livability on Earth. And we cannot do that without big data, AI, to be able to get the frequency and the resolution required for that measurement. So, you know, on all accounts, I mean, from the mitigation opportunity all the way to actually monitoring the planet, I would argue that we cannot do it without putting all the technologies we have now to work. Then when it comes to risk, of course, this is a discussion very, very broad in society today of the risks of AI moving out of control in terms of self-reinforced intelligence. I mean, that is one part of this, but from a climate science perspective, I must say that we see more opportunities than risks in our assessment area, but also in the solution space, and are therefore not so nervous about the risks of having general intelligence suddenly taking over the trajectories of human development. So I would rather kind of hold it there and say that climate science now shows that we need to really mobilize big data and AI technologies for the good and really emphasize that investment.
Great. And Kate, you had talked about energy and water impacts and trying to manage those. I know that's something you guys have thought a whole lot about, and maybe you could just share, like, how are you actually trying to make sure that we are addressing those issues even while we use AI for all the positive benefits that Johan was just describing?
Yes, absolutely. And so I think we of course are very bullish on the opportunity space for AI, but as I said at the outset, we also have to be extremely responsible and thoughtful about the environmental footprint of AI models, of operating the data centers that enable those models. So I'll share a little bit about our experience from Google and what we see that's working, and again, where we think there's more work to be done. So, AI is at an inflection point today, and so it is hard to predict what the energy consumption will look like on a 2030 time horizon. But what we do have to look at is a long history. Google built its first data center in 2007. We've now had hyperscale data centers for quite some time. And these hyperscale data centers are highly optimized. They're built for efficiency. So for instance, at Google, what we found is our data centers today are 1.5 times more efficient than an average data center, and compared to 5 years ago, we can get 3 times more compute for the same amount of electricity. So there's a long track record of optimizing the overhead systems in data centers. We need to keep doing more of that. Then there's also actually how we train the models themselves. We also have to do that in a highly efficient way. So last year, my colleague Dave Patterson and several other colleagues from Google published a paper that pointed to best practices for how you can train models in a much more efficient way. And what that pointed to is that you can reduce energy consumption by 100x, emissions by 1000x, by doing some pretty basic things in how you train your models. So we need to keep doing more of that. We need to keep sharing those best practices and adopting them across the industry. Then there's also the hardware itself. There's some very specialized hardware that's being built to run AI models, and at Google we have TPUs, tensor processing units. And one of our most recent versions of that, TPU v4, is one of the most efficient processing units that is out there today. So we need to keep pushing on the efficiency there as well. And then the final area, which Damilola touched upon in her opening remarks, is 24/7 carbon-free energy. We also absolutely need to ensure that we're able to power global data centers on carbon-free energy every hour of every day, wherever they're operating. So that's the goal that we've set for ourselves at Google by 2030. We're about 64% of the way there today, and we need to keep driving towards that goal. So that's how we're thinking about it on the energy and emissions side. And then also to touch upon water, because as I mentioned at the outset, a lot of data centers use water for cooling, and the way that we've come to think about this is climate conscious cooling, that we need to look at this energy water nexus, that water can be much more energy efficient, but it's not always the right answer to use water. And as we all know, water is highly contextual. Where a watershed is healthy, there can be responsible use of water. Where it's not, we need to think about solutions. So that's something we're very passionate about at Google. We have a goal to replenish 120% of the water we use globally on an average basis by 2030. And so that's through partnering with communities, through working to make sure watersheds are healthy around the world, and then also looking at alternative solutions to water-based cooling where we need to. So I do really think, Rich, just to wrap up on this point, that we need to keep paying attention to this. I think we all believe that the opportunity of AI will far outweigh these risks, but it doesn't mean that they aren't really important. We need to stay on top of them.
Very helpful. And so I want to take advantage. We don't have so much time left, but I really want to make sure we get to policy, because we have the privilege, Rick, of having you here, but also Kate with your experience. And just so where do you see, from a policy point of view, what we can do, what we should be doing to enable AI? Because the potential that we shared at the beginning, that 5 to 10%, is enormous. but we have to, it's one thing to say it's the potential, it's another thing to make it real at scale all around the world. And we're finding in so many fronts this collaboration between business and government to get to effective policy is essential to go faster on things. And I just wondered, Rick, you're living this day and night. I mean, going faster on climate is like what you're living and breathing, and where you see policy as an unlock to go faster as it relates to AI-related opportunities.
Yeah, thank you. And first, let me just say, as a consumer of the eco option on the Google Maps, I love it because often it gives you kind of a different route that's more interesting, a little slower pace, and also nice to put a little less wear and tear in the car. It's great, and it's cool to hear about the contrails, about that. A lot of fun things happening, as well as the big picture things that this can make possible. On policy questions, I'm not going to comment on the sweeping questions around AI. I'm not in a position to do that. It's not my portfolio. What I can say is that when it comes to the work that our office does under Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, John Kerry, who leads our international climate work, and I serve as one of his deputies, we are most focused on what's the potential for this technology to help with our agenda of keeping a safer 1.5 degree centigrade future within reach and helping the world in terms of preparedness and adaptation to climate impacts. And on that front, we see major opportunities, and we've been gearing up accordingly. So, for example, our Agency for International Development in early 2022, which in terms of the public and government awakening to the reality of AI. It feels like a while ago. Agency for International Development for the United States was on the case with an AI strategy, and they are working with AI in crucial development priority areas that intersect with climate, such as how to better predict and thereby respond to the risk of famines and food shortages. There's a tremendous partnership between AID and NASA to do the whole gamut of remote sensing toolkit in order to help with the development agenda with early warning systems and with adaptation goals, with agricultural productivity, including through basically versions of precision agriculture with better integration of predictions around the weather and rainfall and so on and so forth. So all that is moving, and I think it is, that's just one agency in the vastness that is the US government, but it is, I think, important that governments everywhere with the capacity for this kind of work really proactively engage stakeholders, other agencies, and try to identify and chase these opportunities, because they don't just happen without convening and catalyzing within government, outside of government, and so I'm really pleased that we are seeing that happen in key agencies that we work with out of the Special Envoy's Office on climate. In addition, President Biden has, in October of this year, put forward an executive order that seeks to manage AI more broadly, and that includes a very specific call for the Department of Energy to take a hard look at what can be done on use of AI in speeding deployment of clean energy solutions and related challenges around the grid and so on and so forth. So that work is underway, and it's underway because President Biden and White House leadership are eager to see that we really use the full toolkit that we have from the climate science challenges that are so essential to really move faster to address, to mitigation, and then of course to helping the world managing through the ever more serious climate impacts that we're suffering. And so hopefully as an element of that, we can see more and more work on this fast mitigation complement to the energy transition through tackling non-CO2 emissions that are short-lived but potent greenhouse gases. And so we can get a tremendous bang for our buck if we can have better data on things like methane and tropospheric ozone and so on and so forth, so that we can get at that over half of today's climate change that these non-CO2 greenhouse gases are already causing, even as we accelerate the energy transition, including with AI solutions across the board.
Great. So I'm conscious of the time. So actually, Johan, I'm going to go to you and just say, from your end, where do you see partnership opportunities on AI that could really move things forward? So it's not just what individual actors do, but how we work together better that could really accelerate this climate action that we're all sort of pushing toward.
Yeah, and let me come to that. And let me just first, just a little small kind of signal of warning. I just think that one red thread in the discussion here is speed. We recognize now that the only name of the game today is acceleration. The time of incremental change is over. So all the let's say incremental improvements we can do should definitely be implemented very rapidly. Right. But fundamentally, what you started with, Rick, is 6 to 7% emission reductions per year from oil, coal, and gas simply has to happen. It is, after all, 70% of the emissions. I agree, short-lived climate forces are important. We should really go fast on them as well. But fundamentally, we need to attack the big challenge. So I would, for example, argue, Kate, that it's fantastic what you're doing on efficiencies and monitoring data centers, but I think that will be quite an easy trajectory, actually. I mean, green electricity must be an immediate, it's a low-hanging fruit. We should be able to deliver that for all the data centers in the world. It should be implemented within the next 7 years to cut emissions by half by 2030. So we have to have that focus very, very clearly. And that's where I think your question comes up very centrally, to have science, policy, but also the frontier of innovation and business to work much more closely together. We're trying to establish much closer relationships with NASA, ESA, the big satellite remote sensing providers, to connect us with our climate models and the supercomputer capacities we have, to be able to, as I mentioned earlier, to really measure the planet, but also to be able to have much higher resolution, real-time information for the methane and the tropospheric ozone, but also the contrails and all the opportunities. It has to be like a vast smorgasbord of action occurring simultaneously right now. And keeping, because my fear is that particularly if I may say so in this room, that many policymakers love the idea that, okay, so now AI will solve 15% of the problem. So now we can go slow on the big items on our fossil fuel phase out. Right. That we do not want to happen. It has to be a simultaneous joint effort on all fronts. And I think that's where the partnership is really important.
Great. It's so well said. So Rick and Jan, and then Kate, also maybe you'll do a bit also of your overall takeaways. But Rick and Jan, can I just, if you had like one final thought of where AI can play a big role on this massive acceleration on climate action that we need, I just wondered if you could share a last thought with us, each of you.
I mean, I'll be very brief. I do think, first let me just be super clear in response to this back and forth, that there's no doubt that we need to do it all in parallel and quickly and faster. And just yesterday, the United States joined the Powering Past Coal Alliance, in part to show that actually it's been a decade since we built a new unabated coal power plant in the United States, and we're rapidly phasing out our unabated coal power in the US. We need to pick up the pace on all of that. We are doing everything we can to accelerate renewables and above all to win the energy transition imperative. So no argument there. On the contrary, 100% agreement, as you know from my boss and your many conversations with him. And at the same time, to manage that overshoot risk, if we can complement the energy transition by, of course, ending deforestation and hitting the brakes on non-CO2, it is the fastest way to manage the overshoot risk. So we want to do it all. AI can help us across the board with those different elements. I would say that in the non-CO2 space, there's some particularly interesting elements because the atmospheric chemistry is so complicated, and for governments to be able to really act on things like tropospheric ozone, or for that matter, pinning down where their methane sources are and how to get at them in real time, we need advanced computing to help. And so we have things that are moving along with satellite data for methane sources, including the large sources of emissions from today's oil and gas systems that are emergent. And we have something called the Methane Alert and Response System with the International Methane Emissions Observatory. We need those kinds of institutions to really quickly get at those leaks in the system as they emerge, and have governments and national oil companies respond in real time. And so that's just one of a blizzard of examples, a smorgasbord of examples of where we need to have these new solutions help us to work faster across the energy transition, ending deforestation, including with better data on what's going on with forests, and including forest quality. Degradation of forests is something that's harder to pick up from satellites, but it's the kind of thing that AI could help with. And then finally, cutting non-CO2 superpollutants as an essential complement to the energy transition.
Johan.
Yeah, and I can just say I totally agree. I think that's the biggest charge we have to have high resolution measurement of the entire planet, you know, from individual ecosystems all the way to short-lived climate forcers to the big leaks and emitters. You know, we simply have to have delivery on the Paris Agreement, and the only way to do that is to have accountability. And the accountability has to come with AI-driven planetary monitoring.
And Kate, your one takeaway, but also we've been a part of this discussion, so any other reactions you have?
Yeah, no, indeed. Thank you all. I think this has been an excellent discussion, and I really appreciate the point that you've both underscored around we need to see AI as a further accelerator, as part of moving faster, of moving at speed and scale. So I could not agree with you more. And Rick, I really appreciate all of your multiple decades-long leadership on the non-CO2 factors, and thank you for all of your great work. And I'm really thrilled to hear your excitement about AI's potential to accelerate that and provide those insights. So we're very bullish on supporting that work. And Dr. Rockstrom, similarly, all of your critical work and how we can further accelerate understanding of planetary boundaries, some of the fundamental science, huge opportunities, and we also stand ready to continue partnering with you on that further. And I think really, Rich, I think my takeaway is this conversation has reinforced a lot of the findings of the paper about the opportunity that we have, about the way that we need to partner, and the critical opportunity we have to put AI tools in the hands of policymakers, in the hands of scientists, to further accelerate and make more progress in this decisive decade.
Great. Well, thank you for joining us. I just want to say two quick things in conclusion, beyond just the privilege to be on stage with Johan and Rick and Kate, who have been such amazing leaders on climate action for a really long time. The first is that we have to deploy trillions of dollars in the years ahead. We have to deploy trillions of dollars to do a massive energy transition, to reshape our whole economy, and to protect people whose lives and livelihoods are at risk from the temperatures that have the rises we've seen and what is baked in, which is unfortunately a very accurate word, into the years ahead. And to me, what gets me most energized is AI, not as a way to not have to make those investments, but to be able to make those investments in the wisest way possible with the greatest impact, and to take advantage where we already have assets or we already have communities to help them optimize best in a challenging world, whether it's to drive more efficiency, whether it's to drive more reduction, whether it's to support communities that are struggling. And I think we're in this unique moment in time where this tool has come along that can help us take this massive investment and make it as smart, as wise, as impactful, as fast as possible. And then I just have to say, on a very personal note, it has been wonderful over this year to have the opportunity to team with Google to take this topic on. I mean, climate and AI have been passions at BCG. They've been passions at Google. It's fun to find kindred spirits in a world of partnering to be on a journey together. And the chance to work with Antonia and with your team for all of us has been great. And I hope that when you have a few moments, probably not these next few days, but maybe on your travels home, you'll have a chance to read the report and then think about whether it's in reduction, whether it's in adaptation, whether it's in other tools, where that could be applicable in the worlds you operate. And from all of us, I think there's a desire to engage, and don't hesitate to reach out if you have questions or ideas, or any of us can be helpful to you. So thanks everyone for joining us.
Introducing myself, I'm Lee Ray.
lesser.rich.
Lesser. Got it.
And I'll just make a quick connection
Okay.
for you.
Is this correct?
Lesser at BCG.